to order. Welcome to meeting number 31 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Agriculture and Agri-Food. Pursuant to the order of reference of Wednesday, March 10, 2021, and the motion adopted by the committee on April 15, 2021, the committee is beginning its study of Bill C-205, an act to amend the Health of Animal Act. Today's meeting is taking part in the hybrid format pursuant to the House order of January 25th, 2021. And therefore, members can attend in person in the room and remotely using Zoom application. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. So you are aware, the webcast will also show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. I'd like to take the opportunity to remind all participants to this meeting that screenshots or taking photo of your screen is not permitted. Alors, pour garantir
To ensure this meeting runs smoothly, I would like to share some rules with you. Before you click, please wait for me to recognize you. If you're participating via video conference, click on the microphone to unmute it. The microphones of participants in the room will, as usual, be monitored by the Proceedings and Verification Officer. I remind you that all comments from members and witnesses should be directed to the chair. When you do not have the floor, please mute your microphone.
And before we get going, I'd like to remind members that the amendments for Bill C-206 must be sent to the clerk by Friday, May 7th, tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. And now I'd like to welcome the witness who has 7.5 minutes for the opening. I'd like to welcome Member of Parliament for Foothill, John Barlow. So, Mr. Barlow, you have the floor for 7.5 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and it is great to be back here with some friends, and certainly looking forward to the discussion today. And it really is an honor for me to be in front of the Standing Committee on Agriculture and Agri-Food to discuss my private member's bill, Bill C-205, an act to amend the Health of Animals Act. Mr. Chair, Bill C-205 proposes to amend the Health of Animals Act to make it an offence to enter without lawful authority or excuse a place in which animals are kept, if doing so could result in the exposure of animals to disease or toxic substance capable of affecting or contaminating them. Simply put, this enactment would apply existing penalties within the Act to people who trespass on farm property at facilities where animals are kept. It also proposes to double existing fine amounts for groups and organizations who encourage unlawful behavior which put the biosecurity of our farms and food supply at risk. The new offense, titled Exposure of Animals to Disease or Toxic Substance, would be inserted after Section 9 of the Act under Prohibitions, the heading within the Controls of Diseases and Toxic Substances portion of the Act. Existing penalties within the Act are found in Section 65 under General Offense. Bill C-205 would apply those penalties to the new offense. The bill would also add subsection 1.2, where, as was mentioned previously, would double existing fine amounts for groups and organizations who encourage unlawful behavior, which puts the biosecurity of our farms and our food supply at risk. But two key principles are considered when I was drafting this bill. First, I wanted to work within the existing legislation and enhance what was already there and ensure the penalties and deterrent for unwanted behavior. Second, I wanted to develop legislation to deal with one specific incident, rather than the bill should have the capacity to address the big picture challenges associated with trespassing incidents across the country. But Mr. Chair, I also want to be very clear what this bill does not do. This bill does not limit individual rights to peaceful protest on public property. This bill also does not prevent whistleblowers from coming forward when they are witness to practices which jeopardize food security or the welfare of animals. In fact, farmers and their employees are obligated to report any wrongdoing to the appropriate authorities as they operate in a highly regulated environment. They must also follow strict rules and codes of conduct to ensure the health, safety, and welfare of our farm animals. Mr. Chair, I certainly know the members of this committee, and they are well aware there have been numerous protests of animal activists on farm and at processing plants. The situation is not limited to a specific segment of animal agriculture or a certain part of this country. Members from all parties recounted the situations in their ridings when this bill was debated in the House at second reading. I won't revisit all of those stories today. Instead, I'd like to touch on one aspect of the bill which has no clause for this committee to consider, but will perhaps have the most impact on farmers and ranchers if this bill does become law. It's a subject matter this committee knows well, and that is the mental health in agriculture. Mr. Chair, it is fitting, given this week is indeed Mental Health Week in Canada. The idea for this bill came to me as a result of an incident within my riding and a turkey farm near Fort Macleod, when I went to visit the Shedder family after they had about 30 protesters on their farm. The Shedder family came out to check the turkey barns at 7 in the morning, as they always do, and were shocked to find about 35 or 40 protesters had camped out in their barns. And when I spoke to Mr. Shedder and his son, he just couldn't understand why they were targeted. What had they done? This had been a devastating incident for their family, but also for farmers across my riding and across the country who phoned and emailed me, and maybe many other members of this committee, as concerned. Is this open season on farmers and ranchers? Is this something that we have to endure? Why are they being targeted? This committee will recall that in its 2019 report titled Mental Health, a Priority for Our Farmers, you heard testimony from witnesses where farmers were the victims of stigmatization at the hands of activists. For the benefit of people listening and those who have not read the committee's report, I'd like to quote part 3 of that report. Today, farmers, ranchers, and producers come under attack from many different sources. As one witness put it, our ancestors only had to worry about weather and prices. Today, we farmers have the added worry of being a target of extreme activists, something that takes a serious toll on me mentally. Committee members heard extremely disturbing testimony from witnesses related on how they had been verbally assaulted, threatened, and called murderers or rapists over social media channels by environmental terrorists and animal rights extremists. Such social media attacks are not tolerated in most urban settings or among teenagers, yet little has been done to curb these attacks targeted on farmers. Whom do these animal rights activists target? Of course, the first ones in their sight are the producers. Today, as well as being called polluters, they are accused of being aggressors and rapists because of artificial insemination and child kidnappers and killers. You know, those words have extremely serious consequences. As one farmer told me, when he gets up in the morning and sees that type of thing on Facebook, he is already wondering how he is going to cope. It adds a lot of stress and distress. Such testimony is troubling and deeply disturbing. Sadly, it is quite common to see many instances of bullying and intimidation towards farmers go unpunished. This section of the report led to the following recommendation from this committee. Recommendation 4 states that the federal government should take any and all measures necessary to prevent these unprovoked attacks, as well as make sure individuals who perpetrate them face justice. Bill C-205 speaks directly to that recommendation. As you can see, imagine waking up knowing your farm is the target of some of these individuals and groups, but not knowing if or when they'll show up at your home or your farm, or what they have planned for the animals in your care, or what they may do to your property, your employees, or your family. Though my bill may not prevent unprovoked attacks on social media, it certainly aims to deter groups and organizations who encourage others to bring this type of aggression onto the doorsteps of farm families and unlawfully trespass onto farm property where animals are kept. I hope members of this committee can see the importance and urgency of this bill and what it would mean for our farms, our ranchers, and our producers, and especially for the farm families like the Shedders who have unfortunately been receiving end of this misguided activism. I would encourage this committee to listen to our hardworking families and support Bill C-205. Mr. Chair, I'm certainly happy to answer any questions from the members of the committee. We will be certainly talking about many other aspects of this bill, but I really thought it was important, considering this is Mental Health Week, to focus on the mental health side of what is being proposed with Bill C-205. But thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Barlow, right on time. So we'll start with the question round, and for 6 minutes, we'll start with Ms. Rood for 6 minutes. Go ahead, Ms. Rood.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Barlow, for appearing here today. And I did have the pleasure of speaking to this bill in the House, and so I want to commend you on the great work that you've done for our producers across this country with this bill. As like you, I also have a lot of farmers in my riding who are who are suffering from mental health issues relating to incidents that have come onto their farms. And I can think of one farmer in particular that I talked to just prior to being elected, and they have an animal farm, and their animals are kept outside. And he told me of how some folks, he had awoke and had some folks that were trespassing on the property and released all of their animals out of the cages, and how it just really took a mental toll on them, on the whole family, and on their livelihood, really, because biosecurity is number one, but the health and safety of the animals is a priority for these folks. It's their livelihood. And so you kind of touched a little bit on what the implications are, and how this would affect biosecurity measures. I'm just wondering if you can comment a little bit further on how this protects the farmers, and how it will continue to help them when they go through these issues from people coming unlawfully onto their farm, so that they're protected and their mental health doesn't suffer anymore.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Rood, and certainly you touched on one of the most important aspects of this legislation, and we really looked at it from two different perspectives. The first perspective was protecting the biosecurity of our farms and our food supply. The second was dealing with the mental health of our farm families and our ranchers, and certainly those who even work at processing plants. The crisis in agriculture, and when it comes to mental health, is real, and we have certainly seen that become even more so as a result of the pandemic, where many of our farm families live in isolated communities, and many of their social gathering opportunities have been canceled. Rodeos, family fairs, community dinners, those types of 4-H. So we've seen the mental health impact on agriculture become even worse. And my colleague from the block, I thought, put it very well in his speech during the second reading when he said, imagine if you were a homeowner and you came downstairs in the morning to get breakfast for you and your kids, and there was a group of protesters sitting in your living room saying that you're mistreating your family dog. Never would that be appropriate, or would be something that would not face very serious consequences. But unfortunately, when it comes to farms and agriculture, this is becoming all too often just part of the business, and that is unacceptable. There has to be strict consequences for those types of actions. And I think the most important thing here is oftentimes the protesters or the activists don't understand the very strict biosecurity protocols that are in place, and unknowingly maybe spreading a disease from one farm to another.
Thank you very much. And you kind of touched on my next question for you. And I have a lot of fall fairs in my riding, as I'm sure a lot of our rural members of parliament do. And of course, at those fall fairs, there's young people who go to show their livestock as part of their 4-H club, or just as part of the exhibition or fair itself. And you touched on rodeos as well. So I'm just wondering if you can share with us whether this bill, if passed, would apply to things such as fairs and exhibitions, or even, I guess, zoos for that matter.
Thank you very much for the question, and through the chair, yes, it would. The idea of this bill would deal with any animal that is in an enclosed area, so a corral, say at a rodeo, or a barn or a holding area, but also during transport. And certainly I have a Cargill meat processing plant in my riding, as well as Bovary. But Cargill, as Mr. Longfield will know, is one of the mine is the largest processing plant in the country. So that is 4,000 head of cattle going into that facility every single day. That's a lot of transport trucks. So there's lots of opportunities for some contamination to be spread, for diseases to be moved amongst one animal to another. So it's also very important that when those animals are in transport, they are also protected. So rodeos, transport trucks, zoos will all be encapsulated within this legislation.
Thank you very much. And lately we've heard in the news, and we've heard a lot of people talking about their charter rights and freedoms. And I'm just wondering, are there concerns with the constitutionality of this proposed bill? Because I know that's a question that's out there, and we want to make sure that we're not infringing on peaceful rights to protest. So I'm just wondering if you can comment on that as well.
Yeah, thanks for that question. And it was an important aspect of this bill. And many of my colleagues, Mr. McGregor, brought this up, and I thought he was very eloquent about it, is we wanted to ensure that this bill did not infringe on the rights of Canadians to peacefully protest on public property. I think that's an integral part of our society, something that we want to ensure is protected. And absolutely, this does not prevent any group or individual from protesting on public property. You can do it on the highway, in the ditch, but there has to be a line that cannot be crossed, and that is that fence line or that driveway or that barn door, where there are some very real financial and mental health consequences. So this does not prevent any Canadian from peacefully protesting on public property outside of a processing plant or a farm.
Thank you,
very
Mr.
much.
Barlow. Thank you, Mr. Rood. And now to Mr. Blois for up to 6 minutes. Go ahead, Mr. Blois.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank Mr. Barlow for his remarks. It's clear that this is something he's very passionate about, and just as an aside, I would be remiss without talking about sign wars. I've seen a few of his pictures locally, and I'm getting quite a kick from them, so well done. The first question that I have when I look at this, and Mr. Barlow, you touched upon this a little bit, that you said in your remarks with Ms. Rood, most activists don't understand or don't appreciate the biosecurity risk. And so if that is indeed the case, my concern with the legislation, although the intent I think is well-meaning, is when I look at knowing that or being reckless too, is that a threshold that you feel is too high for us to be able to even get any type of conviction to actually deter this type of activity that you're talking about here today?
I appreciate the question, and thanks, Mr. Blois, for noticing my sign wars. But we're trying to lighten it up a little bit. It was getting a little bit vicious, but it was a good way to highlight some local businesses for sure. But on your question specifically, there has to be a deterrent that is in place that puts our farm families at ease, that they are going to be, that their issues are being taken seriously, let's say. But there also has to be some consequences in place for those activists and protesters who, as I said, and as you mentioned, that may not know the protocols that are in place. You know, many of us on this call have certainly toured farms in our ridings or across the country, and you know, at Mountain View Poultry in my riding, for example, I took my staff through there this summer. You've got to put on booties. You've got to put on basically a hazmat suit, hairnet, washing your hands, washing your boots as you go from room to room. You know, and protesters may not understand that, but there has to be that level of consequence there, and certainly
Mr. Barlow, I don't mean to interrupt,
no, okay,
but I get that you and I, when we put our boots on and we're willfully going through that facility with the cooperation of the farmer, we know because we're being told or we're reading the signs that there is inherently a potential biosecurity risk. But the individuals that we're talking about, there's a lot of talk around trespassing and activists and people that are quite militant. How do we know that the legislation that's being proposed is actually going to get to those outcomes and deter? Because that's a pretty high threshold when a prosecutor, and I'll get to that question about who would actually be prosecuting this legislation, would have to illustrate to a court that indeed someone actually knowingly presented this risk to the farmer, right? If these people are uneducated about the background on farms, are we worried that these people will continue to do it and there won't actually be an ability to get a charge under the legislation because of that threshold?
Well, using your argument, I guess, Mr. Blois, I would say doing nothing also doesn't achieve that goal. So we could just keep the current legislation or the act as it is and rely on that to do its job, but clearly it isn't. Most often, from the research that I've done, charges are rarely laid. So this gives us an opportunity through the CFIA, and you'll get to that question, to look at this, but to ensure that there are consequences in place. So I didn't agree with just the status quo, and I would say we've had unanimous support from stakeholders, farmers, ranchers, processing companies, that this was a step that needed to be taken to ensure that those protesters would learn. And it's not militants necessarily, Mr. Blois. It is people who have a legitimate, you know, passion or concern about what they're doing. And this is a way for us to teach them that if you want to do this, there are right and wrong ways of doing it.
Let's talk about the other types of legislation, because you mentioned that there are some recourses, whether it be provincial trespass laws, there's elements under the criminal code. In the instances of the experiences that you've had local, when you talk to the farmers, do they ask the RCMP to press charges, or is there a disconnect between what farmers ask the RCMP to do and what might actually be applicable under the existing legislation?
Well, that's a great question, Mr. Blois, and I'll give you an example of what happened at the incident in my riding in Fort McLeod. It wasn't the farmers that phoned the RCMP. Do you know who phoned the RCMP? The protesters. They wanted to protect themselves from the ramifications of a very shocked ranch family walking into their barn. So at 7 o'clock in the morning, as they broke into this property, broke into the barn, which I would say is actually a free range turkey farm. So they weren't in cages, they weren't in any enclosed space other than being able to go in and out of a barn to keep warm. But it was the activists that actually phoned the RCMP so they could be protected from any, any unknown reactions from a farm family. So
Okay.
in many ways, it's actually the protesters and the activists are phoning the RCMP. But it was a lot of farm families that were putting the pressure on the Fort McLeod RCMP to make sure they press charges.
You talked about CFIA, and you mentioned that you expect that they would be the ones that would actually perhaps enforce these regulations and perhaps bring charges or work perhaps with the RCMP. CFIA doesn't have a whole lot of presence necessarily at the producer level on farm. Did you do any consultation with them about the resources that would be necessary to meet the spirit and intent of your legislation? I think I've got about 30 seconds, Mr. Chair, for you, Mr. Barlow.
Thanks for the question, Mr. Blois. And you're right, CFIA would be the group that would be enforcing this. I'm not in government. I am hoping that if this goes through, that the agriculture minister will ensure that the resources are there, because this is an important issue. I would say if you ask, 10 farmers and ranch families, this is in their top 10 priorities, and if not their number one priority. So I'm sure that it will be, if this bill passes, that we will have to ensure that the CFIA has the wherewithal and the resources to enforce this.
Thank you, Mr. Barlow, and thank you, Mr. Blois. Maintenant, Mr. Perron.
Now, Mr. Perron, for 6 minutes, go ahead. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had trouble unmuting. We're very pleased to see you again, John, at the committee. It's a pleasure to have you here. I think that the members of the committee are all sensitive to the objective of this bill. I've also had the opportunity to speak to this in the House and want to support it here at committee. I want to continue in the same direction as my colleague, Ms. Cody. When you say that the existing laws are not sufficiently enforced, there are two things here. Is there something that guarantees us within this bill that charges would indeed be laid? According to the formulation, you say that a person who's not necessarily aware of biosecurity is one thing, but could that person then not plead innocent for that reason? I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Merci, Monsieur Perron.
Thank you, Mr. Perron.
Great question, and through the chair to you. And I guess the focus of this is as a deterrent. It's not that we want activists or protesters coming onto farms and claiming ignorance. We want to have some teeth in this to ensure that these organizations, in many cases, there's organizations that are organizing these protests and unwanted behavior. So we want to ensure that there's a deterrent there, that this doesn't become a bit of a game. There's nothing that we can have in the legislation that will prove or guarantee charges are laid. But I think what this will do is give CFIA the opportunity to see that this is something that the government of Canada takes seriously, the agriculture sector takes seriously, and should be followed up on.
Et pourquoi?
Explain to me what steps should be taken. Why would we go through the Animal Health Act or Health of Animals Act rather than the criminal code in terms of these penalties? Because this is a home invasion in the end, and it involves private property. So why would we have to go through the Health of Animals Act to achieve this?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Mr. Perron. And you're right. We could have gone the route of the criminal code. but we felt that we needed a national strategy on this, a national vision. While the trespassing laws are provincial jurisdiction, and unfortunately, when we were doing work on this, there are some provinces who have followed through on strengthening their trespassing and mischief laws around this issue specifically. Alberta, Ontario would be the two. Saskatchewan is going through the process, but it hasn't been enacted yet. So the vast majority of provinces don't have anything like this in line yet. So we thought the most efficient way of addressing this was through the Health of Animals Act, focused on the biosecurity issue. And hopefully this will be a learning opportunity for those activist groups or those animal welfare groups, that they have a better understanding that there is some consequences and there is a national standard or a national level of consequences, let's say, when it comes to protecting biosecurity on farms.
D'accord.
All right, thank you for the answer. Another concern I have, and I'd like to hear you on this, is establishing evidence. So if people have gone to a farm and that afterwards there are cases of disease with the herds, and I've heard of this with a hog farm example in Quebec, and there was very significant losses for the family. And also some of these protesters put water into the diesel reserves, and it was not possible to prove that this, to make the connection between the two. So would this help us, this law, in such a problematic case?
Well, I think what the law does to Mr. Perron's question is put some pretty serious consequences in there in the act. And just to go quickly back to your previous question, the issue with some of the provincial rules is the penalties are really insignificant. Let's say anywhere from $200 fine to up to the max that I've seen is $5,000. But we're substantially higher than that. The second part to Mr. Perron's question is usually these activists aren't doing this, in the dead of night to try and sneak in and sneak out. They want attention, right? So they want to make sure what they're doing is getting as much eyeballs as possible, and that's one of the reasons they targeted Jumbo Farm in my riding, because right on Highway 2, a very prominent farm location. They were just lucky that they had some very understanding farm family that didn't overreact. But I think the essence of your question is, we can never assure charges are laid or a conviction is found. That's up to the investigators and that process. But I think the most important thing is with this legislation and what we're proposing is very significant fines that will hopefully act as a deterrent, rather than the insignificant fines that are rarely laid at the provincial level.
La façon dont je le comprends.
The way in which I understand this, has my time expired? Oh, yes, it has. I'm sorry. There's a little gap because of the interpretation, but you'll have a chance next time.
For 6 minutes. Go ahead, Mr. McGregor.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Barlow, for coming here. I guess just sort of as a preliminary question, to your knowledge, has there ever been a documented case of protesters bringing in a disease or spreading it to farms?
Thanks, Mr. McGregor. I appreciate the question, and through the chair, yes. As Mr. Perron had just mentioned, there was one recently in Saint-Hyacinthe, Quebec, where some protesters came on a hog farm, and now that hog farm is infested with rotavirus, something they haven't seen in more than 40 years. We have now seen that coronavirus can be passed from person to mink, and there have been mink farms that have had to have been, their herds, I guess, have been euthanized. But to your question, Mr. McGregor, it only takes one, right? So we are still recovering from bovine spongiform encephalopathy in our cattle industry. There was one case on one ranch in Alberta. We are still have not recovered from that incident, and that's more than 20 years ago. We lost more than 3,000 ranches in Canada as a result of that one case of BSE. only this past summer did Canada apply for negligible risk status on BSE. That cost this industry tens of billions of dollars in lost cattle, but also lost export markets. We are still just getting back into South Korea, Japan. So, there have been cases where this has been identified as an issue, but again, it only takes one. Imagine the impact on our pork industry if we had a case of African swine fever. It would devastate this industry in Canada, as we've seen in Asia, like China, that they've had to euthanize more than 1 million animals.
Yeah, and like I've traveled, I've visited several farms in my day. I referenced them in my second reading speech, and certainly we know from Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada that there are many novel diseases and pests coming into our borders every year. I guess what I'm trying to dig down to is that the federal criminal law power exists. It can exist in several forms: to protect public health, to protect autonomy, protect privacy, and so on. Like when you were in your opening statement talking about the reasoning behind this bill, and I think we're all very sensitive to that. I mean, we did the mental health study, as you referenced. We also almost concluded a study on public perception of agriculture in the last Parliament. It seems to me like that the farmers who were directly impacted in your specific riding case, their first reaction wasn't so much the disease potential to their flock. It was really, what are 30 strangers doing on my property, and why do they think they have the right to be here? So I just wanted to dig down a bit more about, like, do you think the criminal code, especially its trespass provision, might have been also a suitable alternative to act as a deterrent in cases like this, if we really are talking about ultimately trying to protect the private property of farmers and their right to earn a living in peace?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. McGregor, and I appreciate the question. And as you mentioned in your speech in the second reading, your area has been devastated by avian flu, as many. And you're a chicken farmer yourself, so you know how devastating that can be. But it is a mental health aspect to our farm families, and the impact on them is profound, and we cannot underestimate that. And I don't think we can put a price tag on that, to be honest with you. As I said, farmers and ranch families, as you know, they face a lot of variables each and every day, a lot of things that are out of their control, commodity prices, weather, oftentimes commodity, transport, all those types of things. But I think
Mr.
there's a couple.
Mr. Barlow, I think we're getting poor connection, and now the interpreters are not able to. So I don't know if it's apparently it's weak internet. So I don't know if there's anything you can do. Maybe I'll let the technicians work with you there and see if they can correct that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I am getting a bit of a fuzzy audio as well. Maybe if I just logged in and logged out and logged back in, would that be maybe a good first step?
Is that good, Madam Clerk?
Yeah, we're just checking if it's just a matter of connection, but yeah, it seems to be just a question of connection.
I can blame rural Alberta internet, as I'm in Ottawa. So,
would that help, Madam Clerk, if he was to log out and log in again, or?
I'll tell you in just 2 seconds.
Okay, sure.
All right, so Mr. Barlow, I don't know if you have other applications that are opened, but maybe if you could close these applications, since Zoom is taking a lot of energy. So if you could just close the apps, the other apps, maybe it'll be better.
see if I have anything open.
Donc, Monsieur le Président, on peut réessayer.
How's that?
Right.
I've closed everything that I had. Does that help at all? Looks still a little bit.
Seems better. Seems better, I think. Okay, so we had pause on time. I don't know if you recall where you were in your comment, in your reply, Mr. Barlow, or if you need Mr.
Oh, yeah,
Alistair,
I'll
you
just
wanna
get maybe my last question in,
Sure,
because I've got
thanks.
about a minute and a half left, I think.
So we
Go
got
ahead,
a minute and a half. Yeah, minute 50. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. That's great. Technical problems, they will never cease in this Zoom world. Mr. Barlow, just with the wording of your bill, you know, what if I guess a savvy protester took steps understanding what the biosecurity rules were on a farm, and what if they then themselves took steps to protect against biosecurity if they were wearing the proper clothing, took the proper steps with sanitization? Is there a way for them to get around that and still be on the farm? We're just trying to find all, you know, possibilities and ways your bill might be interpreted.
Sure. Well, thank you very much, Mr. McGregor. No, they would, because the wording in the bill is unlawful entrance. So they are still, you know, trespassing on private property. So even though they may have taken all the precautions, they would still be in contravention of the act as they are unlawfully on that property.
And it's your understanding that, you know, I know some cases have been revealed by employees. If employees were on the farm and they notice something going on, they're there with lawful authority and excuse, and so therefore they could report this and not be touched by the provisions of this act.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you raised that. I think you know, kind of that whistleblower element is still there and protected. We wanted to ensure that was still there. As farm employees or even members of the farm family, it is their duty in many ways. If they see something that is not meeting CFIA standards or is endangering the health and welfare of an animal, they should be reporting that.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McGregor and Mr. Barlow. And now we'll go to the second round. Monsieur Lehoux pour 5 minutes. Allez-y, Monsieur.
Monsieur Lehoux for 5 minutes. Go ahead, please. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And thank you to Mr. Barlow. Good afternoon, Don, and welcome this afternoon. This is a very significant bill, C-205. My question is quite simple. I'm in a riding where there are a lot of hog producers, and clearly the issues of biosecurity are very, very important. And they also result in all of that concern and worry that could be a source of mental health problems. So, John, I'd like to hear you on that aspect of the bill, the angle of deterrence and the size of the bill, the penalties rather, are they significant enough to really be a deterrent for breaking and entering by these groups?
Thank you very much, Mr. Lehoux, and it is so good to see you again. I do miss many of you not being able to see you in the House. But yes, thank you. And really one of the reasons that we looked at this bill was meetings with hog farmers and the processing industry. Is one of the next big things that they are worried about is African swine fever and making its, you know, unfortunately planting its roots here in Canada, as we have seen the devastation that has had in the Asian hog industry. As I mentioned earlier, you know, more than 1 million animals have been euthanized in China. And many in the industry, in the hog industry specifically, do not think we are prepared to handle an outbreak of African swine fever here in Canada. Now, ironically, we all talk about COVID-19 right now and the impact that has had on our economy and how, in many ways, we were ill prepared to deal with that pandemic. Well, one would argue that we are equally as unprepared to deal with that outbreak when it comes to animal viruses and diseases. So the idea behind this was to really, in many ways, is raise awareness about the risk that our food supply is in, the very critical role that our farm families play as frontline protectors of our biosecurity, and that this must be taken extremely serious. That is why we set the fines, you know, $250,000 for an individual, up to $500,000 for an organization, because in many ways, you know, if it is a specific organization that is directing this unlawful behavior, those protesters may receive a very small fine, but that organization is free to move on with no consequences. In many ways, they're using this as a fundraiser. So if anything, it's benefiting them. They need these harsh consequences in there.
Et merci.
Thank you, Mr. Barlow. In the same vein, still talking about biosecurity, we know that these standards were established in partnership with various agricultural producers associations and the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. What role do you see for CFIA really throughout this whole dynamic and the enforcement that there should be carried out if this bill was implemented?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Lahu. And that was really one of the things that, in speaking with RCMP and CFIA, they're frustrated at this because they don't feel that they had the tools previously to really to really ensure that protesters who did break onto farms were held accountable. And it was frustrating for them as much as it is for the farm families who want to ensure that they are protected. So basically what we are doing is we are giving CFIA the tools they need to enforce the biosecurity and the mental health of our farm families. This will allow them very strong consequences, or to lay those consequences at the feet of those who unlawfully protest or trespass on the farms.
Ce que je comprends, c'est que l'agence.
As I understand it, is the agency ready to do this work? Have they said what tools they would require, what additional tools to better be able to achieve the objectives that would be achieved by this bill?
We're seeing some moves in a positive direction when it comes to that, Mr. Lahu, in that, you know, in Alberta specifically, and I believe Ontario has done it as well, as you have provincial inspectors training with CFIA inspectors to have a harmonization of qualifications so that they can trade off on some of these duties if they are, you know, obviously some of these places are in remote and rural communities. So you can have that trade-off with CFIA and provincial inspectors to make sure that they have the resources to enforce some of these rules. But if this comes through, we want to ensure that CFIA does have the resources they need.
Thank you, Mr. Barlow. Merci, Monsieur Lehoux. And
thank you, Mr. Lehoux.
Longfield.
Déjà terminé, Monsieur le Président.
My time is up already.
And it's great to be back in the Ag Committee and with Mr. Barlow and Mr. McGregor and yourself, Chair. I remember the studies, and I remember in particular the mental health study and the impact on mental health of farmers and ranchers when not only they're targeted by people invading their property, but also being portrayed as murderers, as you said in your opening statements, Mr. Barlow. I also remember the safe handling of animals during transport, where this was also an issue, where farmers and ranchers are really there to protect and steward the animals that are under their care, and all the protesting goes directly against what the farmers are trying to do to bring animals safely and healthy to market. But the act itself is something that I'm struggling with a bit in terms of the offenses. Currently, they're strict liability offenses, and I'm wondering how straightforward it would be for the CFIA to enforce this bill, where they would have to show that the intent was for the perpetrators to cause a disease outbreak. It seems like this is a significant piece because it really changes the way that CFIA operates. Could you maybe comment, Mr. Barlow, on the sense of what additional resources, you just mentioned that in your closing there. How would this work through the CFIA and the need for them to prove some type of intent under the law?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Longfield. I know you have a Cargill meat processing plant in your riding as well. So you
the second largest. You're the largest.
No competition, but
yeah, that's right.
So you are well aware of the issues that this bill is trying to address, and I really want to be clear with the members of the committee that this is a job that CFIA is already doing. This is not something that we are putting on them that they have never done before. We have, and that was really one of the reasons why we went this route rather than a criminal code change, because the CFIA is already doing this job. We're just, I guess, strengthening the consequences and the deterrence that are there. For example, there were in 12 charges in 2020, I believe, two charges in 2019, and 43 charges under the regulations in 2018. So this is something that they've already been doing. But the issue that I'm identifying here is the consequences aren't tough enough to really deter this type of unlawful activity. And as you talked about, Mr. Longfield, when you're a member of this committee and did that mental health report, the devastation that this has had on Canadian farm families is very real. And that's not even talking about the biosecurity risks that are also just as real.
Yeah, and I remember Mr. Dreeshen also making that point during committee. And as we looked at how do we protect the health of animals, primarily from people that are supposedly trying to protect animals, but doing what they're doing that actually puts the animals and the farm families at risk. So that role of the CFIA, I guess, is one piece that is a bit of an outstanding for me, because I know the CFIA role changed over the years, where they used to also be involved with helping with marketing, but then everything fell under Health Canada. And part of our frustrations with committees is sometimes it was something that had to go to the Health Committee. This one might be something that has to go to the Justice Committee, or I think there would be maybe some clarification that the committee could look into there. But also with the civil rights, the trespass rights you mentioned being a provincial jurisdiction. We do have the national law enforcement in many cases. In Ontario, we've got the OPP. But in terms of how the provinces would see the federal government going into provincial jurisdiction and saying, now we're going to take over this, what would we say to the provinces there?
Well, again, Mr. Longfield, we're not intruding on provincial jurisdiction, because this is a job that CFIA is already doing. And again, we're just giving them, some different tools or some stronger tools for them to do that job. So I think we're not. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt. It's more the precedent of us enforcing the trespass laws. I know CFIA is there for other purposes, but this is more of a trespass situation, I think.
Well, I guess, that's certainly part of it, but this isn't a criminal code trespassing issue. This is already, when it comes to protecting biosecurity on farms, this is something that CFIA already has the authority to lay charges and to enforce. We're just strengthening that part of it. And you're right, CFIA is under the Minister of Health. This is something that we're going to have a discussion with the Minister of Health and at a future date. And I've already reached out to the Minister to have a discussion on this.
Well, so thank you for continuing this discussion. It's very important work, Mr. Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Longfield. Thank you, Mr. Barlow. Maintenant, Monsieur.
And now, Mr. Perron for 2.5 minutes. Go ahead, please. Yes, John, just to follow the line of questioning from earlier on, my remaining question was, do I understand the bill correctly if I state that we would not have to prove that an illness or a secondary effect would be due to this trespassing, that the sole fact of the trespassing could be punished by the penalties included in the bill?
Yeah, that's a great question, Mr. Perron. I appreciate the opportunity to clarify. Yes, this is not something that's only enforced if a disease is brought onto the farm. The whole focus of this is to ensure that does not happen. So the charges enforced by the CFIA would happen if a protester unlawfully comes onto that farm or processing plant, regardless if there are some unfortunate consequences if they did bring in an animal virus or spread something from one farm to another. And maybe back to Mr. McGregor's question on that. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Mr. Perron. Yeah.
Thank you. I just have another quick question. People, including the SPCA, who are responsible for inspections under certain circumstances in Quebec, and the people at CFIA might answer this question, but could this bill limit the powers of inspection of these organizations? That is a concern that I have.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Ms. Perron. I don't see why that would there's nothing in this that would impede inspections, lawful inspections by other organizations, whether that's a provincial health authority. Certainly, in my riding, I have a lot of Hutterite colonies that do commercial butchering and processing and cooking. They have Alberta Health Services that would come in on a regular basis to inspect facilities and animal health, and this would not impede that in any way.
Nous avons la même.
We have the same understanding, and I might just repeat. Could you repeat what you said in answer to Mr. McGregor earlier, please?
Yeah, just to come to what you were saying too is that this does happen, and unfortunately, with the issue in my riding at Jumbo Farms at Fort Macleod, many of those protesters were on a hog farm in Abbotsford, BC, the week before. So they could have easily been carrying a virus or disease from one farm to another. And that's really what we're trying to avoid, is if they were protesting at a farm in another province or another district, certainly with another breed, we want to ensure that they are caught the first time and there are consequences laid there before they have the opportunity to spread that disease to a second operation.
Thank you, Mr. Barlow. Merci, Monsieur Perron.
Thank you, Mr. Perron.
Mr. McGregor for 2.5 minutes. Go ahead, Mr. McGregor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Barlow, I'm going to, I think, just load you up with 2 questions because it's not a lot of time. So the first question is, the first clause makes reference to entering a building or other enclosed place where animals are kept. So my first question is, would this law miss out on protesters who maybe entered a farm but stayed outside of the buildings, and just protested there, so they were nowhere near the animals, but they're still on the property? And the second question is, when you were going back and forth with the drafters for this bill, I'm wondering about that part of the first clause, referring to knowing that or being reckless. Did you ever consider just leaving that out and just saying that, if a person came on where animals were kept and just if entering such a place could spread or expose the animals to disease, just getting rid of that? I just wanted to know about your back and forth about why that specific language was used.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. McGregor. To your first question, I'll try and be as quick as I can. If the farmyard is fenced, so even though they may not be breaking into a barn, if the farmyard is fenced, they would still be contravening the act. If whether they came in the barn door or the gate at the front of the driveway, they would still be contravening the act. If there could be a bit of a loophole there if there is no fence around the farm, which I guess could happen, but extremely rare. If you have livestock or animals, you are going to have a barbed wire fence or an enclosure of some type. That would be still part of the act. Your second question, in all honesty, that we wanted to ensure that there was that portion in there that ensured that we were highlighting the fact that this was specifically for unlawful behavior. I'm not sure about the word on reckless. I'd have to go back in my memory. But we really wanted to make sure that we highlighted the fact that this was focused on unlawful behavior.
Okay, so okay, that's I'm getting close to the end of my time, so thanks for that clarification.
Anytime.
Thank you, Mr. McGregor. And now for 5 minutes, Mr. Steinley. Go ahead, Mr. Steinley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Barlow, and I very much appreciate this bill being brought forward. It does a lot for our producers when it comes to having some clarity around who can and can't be on their farm, and really just giving some peace of mind to producers. You talked about the viruses and diseases that can be brought on the farm. Would I be right in saying that's one of the reasons why there is a higher fee, a higher penalty for organizations and corporations, is because, like you said, just another example, there was someone that was protesting on a hog farm in BC, then coming to a turkey farm in your riding. So could you just kind of expand on that and tell me your thinking on why there would be higher penalties for corporations and organizations?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Mr. Steinley. I think it's time as Canadians and those of us who are involved in the agriculture industry by one way or another understood the very real financial consequences that could happen if there is an outbreak of some sort of virus. And I would say at the highest fine of $500,000 for an organization that was planning this type of event. But I'll go back really quickly to BSE. That cost our industry more than $30 billion, 30 billion with a B. When you lost tens of thousands of animals, as I mentioned, 3,000 ranches were closed in Alberta, and we still have not got our cattle herd back to, as you would know, we don't have our cattle numbers back to the pre-BSE numbers. If we had an outbreak of African swine fever in Canada, that is a $45 billion industry in Canada, 45 billion. So there are very real financial consequences to this that last decades. So I think when we talk about, we've basically doubled the fines as part of this proposal, is still a drop in the bucket to the potential financial implications of an outbreak on a farm or at a processing plant.
And I want to touch on another issue, and it's close to my heart. I grew up on a dairy farm. We had show cattle. We showed from the Toronto Winter Fair to the World Dairy Expo in Madison, Wisconsin, Agribition, Fall Fair. And I think people don't realize what good care producers take care of their animals. And it goes to some of the comments Mr. Boyce made about, well, sometimes you just don't know what goes on a farm or what could happen. Could you give us some examples of actually when strangers come on farmyards, it does shock animals, and it does create a stimulus in their environment that they're not used to, and there could be dire consequences. Like, animals are used to the people that are coming to their pens or that are taking care of them, and just having strangers on a farmyard or in a barn, in its own can cause a very devastating effect to animals, to herds, to people that have taken great care of their animals, and their animals just can't recover from that shock.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Mr. Stanley. This opportunity to talk about our farm families as the ultimate stewards of our land, our water, our soil, and certainly no one cares for their livestock any more than they do, because it is their livelihood. And in many cases, which is again back to BSE, we lost generations of genetics that was building some of these herds for decades. But no one cares for their animals any more than they do. And I go back to the Shedder family. They were devastated when they came in that barn, and many of their turkeys were dead because, as you said, when these strange people came in the barns, they shocked and they trampled one another, running away as quickly as possible in an open pen, so that they weren't in cages, they weren't being poorly treated in any way. So that is another aspect, I think, that people don't understand, and why this is so important to me and many that are involved in the industry, that unfortunately farm families are being depicted as something that is so far from the truth when we talk about how passionate they are and how important their animals are to them, that no one cares for them in any better way than they would. And I think that's something that we have to get out there.
Yeah, I appreciate that very much, Mr. Barlow. And I know on our farm, I'm going home this weekend for branding, and we treat our animals well because they are our livelihood. And I'm looking forward to seeing some family back home and talk about this bill actually, and how we can support our producers and our ranchers. And I'll just talk to my colleagues here. The mental health of our farm families is so important, and this is a bill that can really give our farm producers a signal that we're listening, and we're listening to what they want. So as an agriculture committee and as legislators, I think it's incumbent upon us to send the right signal to our producers that we do have their backs. We are there for them, and we want to make sure that they do have the ability to have some mental health, and make sure that they do have the security and just some stability, knowing that we have their back. So please help me and help Mr. Barlow pass this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Steinley. And now to Ms. Bissette for 5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to share my time with my colleague, Mr. Blois. So, Mr. Barlow, to carry on of the question of Mr. Barlow, are you looking for cooperation from the provinces, given that C-205 is meant to interact with their legislation on trespassing?
Thank you very much for the question, Ms. Bissette. It doesn't interact with provincial legislation. This is something that is a national, federal Animals Health Act. What you and maybe Mr. Perron are talking about is a criminal code issue. So yes, a provincial police force can make a trespassing charge if there is a protester unlawfully on private property. But CFIA could also press charges through the Health of Animals Act. And as I said, you know, 3 provinces, or you know, maybe 4, are working on similar legislation through the criminal code, specifically on trespassing when it comes to protecting biosecurity on farms. But that's only, you know, only Alberta and Ontario now have that legislation. Saskatchewan is going through the process, as is Manitoba. But that still leaves a majority of provinces and territories that don't have anything. And I think it's important that we show some leadership at the federal level on this.
Thank you. Just
And in conclusion, you mentioned in your statement that farmers are harassed through social media, and this is has a significant effect on their mental health. So, what can we do for those farmers who are suffering that kind of online abuse?
Ms. Bissett, thank you so much. That is an incredible question, and I wish I could have the answer to that. You know, we are seeing groups like Do More Ag and those kind of social media groups that are really starting to become proactive and standing up for our industry. That is so important. And I hope as a result of COVID, as a silver lining, people have much more appreciation for our farmers and where their food comes from. But unfortunately, you know, we have that mentality, cowboy up, that you just suck it up, you spray some dirt on it, you move on. And we have to stop that. We have to start talking about mental health as a real issue and something that we can't ignore anymore. And unfortunately, this legislation doesn't address that. But I think all of us can play a role in standing up through this, supporting this bill, showing that we understand that mental health in agriculture is an issue, and we're going to take steps to show them that we support them.
Thank you very much, Mr. Barlow.
Merci
Je vais céder mon temps maintenant à mon...
I'm going to give the rest of my time to Mr. Blois, my colleague.
And again, Mr. Barlow, thank you for your time here today. I would agree with the lion's share of what you've said today, particularly around mental health, and had the chance and the host to recognize the Do More Agriculture Group last week. You're spot on. I want to go back to some of the questioning around Mr. Perron and Alistair, because when I read this legislation, I look at the subtitle, which says exposure of animals to disease or toxic substance. And Mr. McGregor presented a situation where a protester could come on farm and actually take some due diligence to try to avoid the disease or toxic substance. And you said, well, as soon as they walk onto that farm without lawful authority, essentially this is going to trigger them. But do you see that as the only piece? Because when I look at this provision 9.1, I actually read it all the way through to the point where it becomes could result in the exposure of the animals to disease or toxic substance that is capable of affecting or contaminating them. So that's my worry, is that although the intent of this legislation is strong, I don't know if there's actually going to be the ability for CFIA or whoever would be responsible for actually administering it to be able to actually impose these penalties, because there is an actual strong requirement to not only show recklessness and that there was a knowing intent to do exactly this, but can you speak to your thoughts on this? Because you're really talking about just lawful authority and nothing really on the rest of that provision.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Blois, and I appreciate your question and your interest in the issue. Absolutely, we want to make sure that as part of this legislation that we are protecting the biosecurity of farms, and if that protester, and that's that key part of it, is unlawfully on that property and unknowingly or could potentially be passing on a virus or a toxic substance, we don't know if they are or they aren't. Because they aren't a professional, they aren't on that property being shown guidance by the homeowner or the business owner. And I think that's really important. They may think they are doing all the right things, and I'm sure when these protesters and activists come on the property, absolutely they are not trying to put animals in harm's way. Of course not. That's the complete opposite reason why they are there. However, in most cases, they do not understand the biosecurity protocols or the consequences, and that's why I think this legislation is so important.
Just quickly, if I could, Mr. Chair, if indeed that they did meet the protocol or the standard of care, that they were not going to be passing a disease or otherwise, would you admit then that this is the type of legislation that might not impugn them because it really deals with biosecurity? So if they actually met the standard of care, this wouldn't actually trigger it, or is it just simply if they step foot on the property?
Well, I think that would be to Mr. Blois's question. I think that would be up to the CFIA inspector who is there. Again, that the part of this is could pass this on. So I understand where you're trying to go with this, Mr. Blois, but That will be up to the discretion of the CFIA and in the potential consequences that could have been ramifications of that action.
Thank you very much, Mr. Barlow. Thank you, Mr. Blois. And this concludes our first hour. I really want to thank you, Mr. Barlow. Very interesting, very good conversation about a subject that certainly is of interest to all farmers in the country. So with that, we'll pause to get the panel for the next hour, and we'll see you here very shortly. So get your coffee and whatever else you need. We'll see you very shortly. I'll suspend the meeting.
It's good to see everyone. Take care. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
back to order. And for the second hour, we have from the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, we have back on our panel, been here many times, Mr. Jaspinder Komal, Vice-Président Direction des Sciences.
Vice President, Science Branch, Chief Veterinary Officer, and World Organization for Animal Health Delegate for Canada. Welcome. And also, we have Mr. Kelvin Matiuk, Director General, Western Area, Operations Branch, as well as Dr. Mary Jane Ireland, Executive Director, Animal Health Directorate, Policy and Programs Branch. Welcome to all of you. And we'll begin with an opening statement of 5 minutes. And who will take the floor?
Chair, my name is Dr. Jaspinder Komal, and I am Canada's Chief Veterinary Officer and the Vice President of Science at the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. With me today is Dr. Mary Jane Ireland, who serves as the Executive Director of Animal Health, and Mr. Kelvin Matiuk, Director General of our operations in the Western area. We are pleased to lend our expertise to assist you in your consideration of Private Members Bill C-205 and Act to amend the Health of Animals Act. Mr. Chair, the CFI is a science-based regulatory agency, and its broad mandate encompasses animal health, plant health, food safety, and international market access. The proposed bill contains elements that greatly impact how the CFIA currently delivers on its mandated activities due to the proposed changes to the Health of Animals Act. Mr. Chair, the CFIA has programs in place that are designed to protect animal health and support biosecurity. In a nutshell, CFIA's animal health program protects Canada's animals from disease, including aquatic animals, manages animal disease events, promotes and regulates certain aspects of animal welfare, verifies that animal feeds and vaccines are safe, effective, and of high quality, collaborates to develop voluntary biosecurity standards, and facilitates trade and market access for Canadian animals and products. The CFI administers and enforces Health of Animals Act and regulations which address diseases and biological, chemical, or physical agents that may affect animals or be transmitted by animals to persons, and in the same way to protect animals from these risks. The CFIA takes the lead to respond to reportable diseases such as avian influenza, African swine fever, and bovine spongiform encephalopathy, or BSE. There is also the issue of biosecurity, which is a foundational piece in the proposed legislation. The CFIA has a long history of working closely with industry and producer organizations, provincial and territorial authorities, academia, and consulting with international partners to support biosecurity for the regulated parties we inspect. Mr. Chair, under the Health of Animals Act, in the course of their work, CFIA inspectors and officers may require that animals be presented for inspection, require documents be produced, conduct tests or analysis, as well as enter a dwelling place with a warrant, among other authorities officially granted. However, Mr. Chair, CFI inspectors and officers are public officers. They are not peace officers. Public officers are defined as any officer engaged in enforcing the laws of Canada relating to revenue, customs, excise, trade, or navigation. Their powers stem from the acts and regulations they enforce, in this case, the Health of Animals Act, and they are given limited additional powers under the Criminal Code. In contrast, peace officers are generally police officers. Their powers include the ability to detain or arrest individuals. Peace officers may also be armed, whereas public officers, such as inspectors, may not. I would also like to point to the fact that existing legislation already clearly defines and deals with issues related to private property, and its enforcement largely rests with provincial authorities, including peace officers. There are also existing federal provisions under the Criminal Code that deal with trespassing, as well as specific prohibitions on animal cruelty and abuse. What Bill C-205 proposes represents a significant shift from what the CFIA has been mandated to do, and therefore would require an investment of additional inspection resources, further training, and increased legal authorities to assume these additional responsibilities. And given the combination of criminal code provisions, provincial trespass, and animal health legislation, and producers' commitment to on-farm biosecurity that already exist, the proposed amendments would provide limited additional protection to farmers and producers. However, I feel I can only speak to my expertise in animal health, especially as it pertains to CFI's mandate and activities. I trust that this testimony can help inform your study of this proposed legislation, and I'm very happy to be back at this table, Mr. Chair, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jaspiner. And now we'll start our question round. Monsieur Lehoux pour 6 minutes.
Mr. Lehoux, for 6 minutes, you have the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses for being with us this afternoon from the CFIA. And my sense is that you play such an important role on animal health, and you'll answer the question, I don't know which one, but the whole issue of biosecurity. You said that you work in cooperation with different associations of producers to establish the standards for biosecurity, which means that when trespassers enter on a property, regardless of how they get into it, the danger of contamination, which would flow from where they come from, because we know that there are producers that take showers and change their clothes entirely and do the same thing every time they go into or out of a building. So in your opinion, is the whole biosecurity issue from the perspective of this bill very important?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for the question. Biosecurity on an animal farm is very, very important, Mr. Chair. Biosecurity is a responsibility, as I said, shared. We support the development of standards along with industry and provinces, academia. This is the National Animal Health and Welfare Council, who actually convenes these stakeholders. We are there to provide expertise from scientific perspective and also from the international perspective, but it's primarily a provincial responsibility, where provinces, because they have jurisdiction on the farm, and then the producer's responsibility because it's their farm, so they make sure that based on risks that they will implement these standards.
I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt you, but what role more specifically can the agency play in the investigations or the administration of penalties meted out under the law? What would be the main role that the CFIA could play at that point in time?
Yeah, I was going to thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the question. I was going to come to that to say that because it's provincial and producers' responsibility, our inspectors are not there because of the jurisdiction. Our inspectors are only there in case there is a regulated disease, which is regulated under the Health of Animals Act, and then they're called upon to investigate. So they're not there, they're not present in the communities. So it is the provincial government who will implement the biosecurity on the farm and investigate in case there's a breach, unless there's a regulated disease that is happening on the farm. Thank you.
Well, we know that the whole issue of African swine fever exists, and we know that there are a lot of hog producers in my area, and foot and mouth disease has still causing damage. So the whole biosecurity issue is so serious and important. So don't you think that the deterrence that would be represented under this bill for these organizations could be an important aspect?
Thank you for the question again, Mr. Chair. Yes, biosecurity is very important, and we actually communicate with stakeholders to implement biosecurity. Especially, you talked about African swine fever, which is a great threat to the Canadian pig population, given that it's an important economic factor in Canadian agriculture industry. Yes, but there's a level of risk. We think that the level of risk that will be induced by trespassers will be very minimal, because in order to have a risk from a disease perspective, you have to have a continuous and prolonged contact with the animals, and that's how diseases are spread. And African swine fever is one of them. That is a very slow disease that actually is transmitted between pigs, and very low, unless humans are in the farm, in the pig barn with the pigs for a longer period of time, and then transmitting the virus.
Oui, mais je comprends.
Yes, but the question is more, it's much more in line with the activists that move from one farm to another, even if they're not there for that long. Coming from the world of agriculture myself, I know it doesn't take a very, very long time to move these diseases around. It doesn't require huge, long contact. So does the agency have sufficient resources to really frame what would happen if 205, Bill C-205 was passed?
Thank you again. So the current resources that agency is deploying is for our inspectors to be working under the Health of Animals Act to investigate diseases. The resources are not deployed to investigate or to enforce trespassing, which will be a new work for the inspectors, and this will be a game changer. We'll have to have more resources to actually implement this, because it'll require training inspectors, it'll require developing their skills, it'll require equipping them with new instrument or tools. It will require, having more inspectors.
Est-ce qu'à ce moment-là, il ne pourrait pas y avoir une...
So could there not be... I'm sorry, Mr. Perron. Your time has expired. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
For 6 minutes. Go ahead, Mr. Ellis.
Good afternoon, and I'd like to thank you for coming today. And I just wondered, it was touched on in Mr. Barlow's speech about documented cases, and there was one documented cases. Are there documented cases, and how often do trespassing trigger a disease outbreak?
Thank you for the question again. To our knowledge, not many documented cases from trespassing or for people having demonstrations. The one that I heard is the one in Quebec, but I am not sure if there's evidence that there was actually a transmission from these the activists to the pigs. So in scientific literature, we haven't seen much evidence of transmission of disease through these activities. Thank you.
What laws are in effect now to handle trespass on farms, and how would this bill provide a solution, do you think?
Thank you again for the question. There are provincial legislation. There is the criminal code, and as I said before, the jurisdiction on the farm is the provincial responsibility. Therefore, it's pertinent that they and the peace officers will enforce these kind of activities. CFI is not there on the farms unless there's a regulated disease to be managed. So therefore, having this enacted into the Health of Animals Act will sort of muddle the accountability between provinces and the federal government, because this will, the way it is right now, that the bill is drafted, it will have to show the evidence beyond doubt that there was a disease or biosecurity breach that happened in order to prosecute any perpetrators. So, but in the provincial legislation, there are there is provisions that they can implement, and they can enforce the provisions of the trespassing and the criminal code.
So do you know how this bill differs from, we spoke earlier in testimony about there already being trespass laws in Alberta and Ontario, I believe. And how would this bill actually affect those laws if it took effect? And do you know the difference between these bills and the ones that are already effect, or this bill and the ones that are already in effect?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. To this question, maybe I'll ask my colleague, Dr. Ireland, to explain the differences as you know, how are they now implemented? Over to you, Mary Jane.
Yeah, thanks. And just in respecting the fact that I'm not a lawyer, there is existing legal legislation to deal with these types of incidents. There is existing provincial and territorial jurisdiction over property and civil rights, and laws that prohibit trespassing in almost every province. As we heard earlier, Alberta, Ontario, Saskatchewan, and PEI have recently passed enhanced private property legislation as a way to deter animal rights activists from trespassing on farms and in food processing facilities. And British Columbia and Manitoba are also considering similar legislation. Federally, the criminal code also includes provisions that deal with trespassing. We've got section 177, which prohibits trespassing at night, 430, which deals with general acts of mischief, and section 348, which codifies breaking and entering with the intent to commit or committing an indictable offense. So these are areas of legislation that are already in existence to deal and deter trespassing. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And I guess just one last question. Are there similar laws in other countries, or how do they handle this? Do you know of our trading partners?
The laws, to our knowledge, the laws that pertain to health of animals, we know that on south of our border, USDA, APHIS, the health of animals laws are very similar to what we have in Health of Animals Act. These are laws that are made pursuant to the standards developed by the OIE, the World Organization for Animal Health. So they're almost very similar to each other in other countries because of trade. So they are very focused on trade. They're not focused on the trespassing activities or things like that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Ellis. And now we'll go to, okay, Monsieur Perron. Welcome, Monsieur Lamoureux, also on the committee. Monsieur Perron.
Mr. Perron, for 6 minutes. Go ahead, please. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses for being with us today. It's greatly appreciated. I don't know which one of you will be able to answer the next question, but someone mentioned that there are existing pieces of legislation that deal with these kinds of behaviors. So how do you explain that these things continue to happen repeatedly? Is it not a sign that the existing legislation is not effective?
Perhaps, thank you, Mr. Chair. Perhaps I can start, and I'll ask my colleagues if they want to add. Some of, as was mentioned previously, many provinces have implemented legislation for trespassing. Normally, if these things happen, producer would call the peace officers to ensure that they are protected, and they can also work with the provinces to ensure that, that these activities are not carried out. So there are provisions there, and that can be enabled by producers.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I have very limited time. I know that there are laws, that's what I said in my prelude, but how do you explain that these activities continue to occur or these events continue to take place? Wouldn't Mr. Barlow's piece of legislation deal with a gap here?
Thank you again for the question, Mr. Chair. The intent of the bill as it is to protect against trespassing, and then the second intent is on biosecurity. In our mind, as experts in animal health, it is a little bit difficult to reconcile the one with the other, because biosecurity can be caused, the breach in biosecurity can be caused by anybody, a farm worker or a trespasser or anybody else. And the biosecurity with this kind of activity, the risk is on the more on the lower side of the ledger in terms of risk of diseases. So that's why it is a little bit difficult to see this the Health of Animals Act is the right act to have this bill amended. Thank you.
Mais juste un
But indeed, what you're answering is very interesting. What you're saying is interesting because you can't, it's hard to assess the risk. And you said in answer to a previous question that the evidence would be difficult to establish. So indeed, this bill is intended to punish the simple fact of having entered and into these areas. So it's in an effort to prevent biosecurity problems. So don't you think that in terms of food safety and the mental health of our producers, we should try and avoid these most unfortunate events when people might be so upset to find these people on their farms, and therefore I know through precaution, and it's difficult to prove scientifically, don't you think it's a good idea to increase the penalties in order to deter people from doing these things?
Thank you again for the question. I'll ask Dr. Ireland again if she wants to respond to this.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I mean, I think CFI acknowledges the potential risks to animals and animal health and welfare, and in fact, also the mental stress that trespassing poses to producers and their staff and family. And yes, trespassing is not something that we want to happen for a number of reasons. However, in light of considering this particular bill, we contemplate that we need to think about the fact that there is existing legal instruments that are already there to deal with the activity at both the federal and the provincial levels. And CFI staff have neither the legal authority nor the training to perform as peace officers, which would be required with this bill, nor is the CFI structured, in fact, in a manner that would allow for the timely response to trespassing incidents. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Est-ce que j'apprécie votre réponse?
I appreciate your answer, Ms. Ireland. So, could there not be some partnership with police forces and the agency, and the peace officers would deal with this kind of home invasions, because that's what it is, I mean, in the broader sense on the farm, but could there not be a partnership? You don't need to have police officers because they already exist. But you could just attest to the fact that there was a threat of biosecurity because someone has intruded on a secure workplace.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I understand the question correctly, I think the member is asking about how CFI would go about enforcing the bill's provisions. And if I have that correct, I would say that in response to that, the first response to an incident of trespassing would be the police of jurisdiction, including the RCMP in some Canadian locations, and provincial, territorial, municipal police forces, depending on the police in that area. They would be the first to arrive in such a situation. And should there be an indication that a trespasser has exposed an animal to a disease or toxic substance that is capable of affecting and contaminating them, CFI would be called in to investigate. The CFI employees would not attend any volatile location alone, certainly, but they would need to be accompanied by a local peace officer or police officer.
Thank you, Ms. Ireland. Thank you very much. Merci, Monsieur Perron.
Thank you, Mr. Perron.
For 6 minutes. Go ahead, Mr. McGregor.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to our witnesses. So I think the CFIA has very clearly explained that they are not peace officers. They do not have the ability to detain, arrest, or carry firearms. I'm wondering, with the existing Health of Animals Act, has the CFIA ever had to have a peace officer accompany them in order to enforce its currently existing provisions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would pass this question to Mr. Matuik because he's on the ground. He will be better able to explain.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To the member's question, the process that we would use as public officers in the agency would be to call the local police authority to assist us on a matter. So that could range from many factors of if there was a humane transport issue at play, if we in fact move to actually quarantine a farm and we're going to need to detain animals, for example, and we had an uncooperative producer, then of course we'd need the assistance of the police force to assist us in that matter. Again, that goes to the notion that our staff are inspectors, veterinarian, and scientists, not peace officers, as you described in your opener, carrying the enforcement authorities and detainment authorities that would be vested with the police authority.
Thank you. Mr. Barlow, in his opening remarks, explained the situation in his own riding on a turkey farm where the family woke up early in the morning, found 30 protesters on site. You know, if this bill was in fact law right now, like how would the CFIA go about to investigate such an occurrence? I mean, it seems like you would have to have peace officers on hand to detain everyone, and then you'd have to devote some significant resources to conduct an investigation. I mean, are the standards of proof in this bill, like how would you go about proving that an offense had occurred under the provisions of this bill?
Mr. Chair, to the member's question, you ask a very, very big loaded question for us. Obviously, we are trained on sort of causal review of cases to really get to a result of what were the circumstances. But to your point, this would represent a very fundamental shift for the agency in its role and its mandate, where we would be asked if this bill was passed to become peace officers, and all of the details and training that would be needed in authorities and policies and procedures in order to actually act as police officers on the detainment of the scene and conduct the investigative process. So certainly it adds a tremendous complexity, and again would fundamentally shift the role of the agency on the health and well-being of animals and its overall disease management that we do within the agency.
Thank you for that. And given the CFIA's current resources across Canada, you know, what ability do you have to respond in a timely fashion to some of the most rural farming properties that exist out there?
Mr. Chair, to the member's question, another excellent question. When we look at the geography of Canada and a very vast country where the rural population represents the highest geographical vastness, you're absolutely correct. The agency would have to significantly increase its staff complement. We would have to geographically think about where we position our officers and staff and investigators to actually conduct what this bill is asking of us if it was passed, and therefore would have to have a pretty big investment in upping our staff complement and skilling them and positioning them across the country in order to be very responsive on any one issue that would come to light relative to trespassing and resulting biosecurity issues.
And if C-205 were to become law, is there any other agency that can be tasked with enforcing the Health of Animals Act, or does it always have to be the CFIA?
Well, the CFIA has a responsible authority under the Health of Animals Act. If we were to go to the notion of biosecurity, of course, we work very, very closely with our provincial partners and territorial governments around their authorities that they have within the context of their Health of Animals Act, trespassing, or other provincial statutes. So we work very collaboratively with them now, because ultimately, if there is a disease outbreak, then we want to ensure what really is involved, and if there is a federal responsibility on a reportable disease, then of course, under the Health of Animals Act, CFI would have to take responsibility to manage that particular disease outbreak on that particular farm, like avian influenza, like BSE, like African swine fever.
And just finally, the Bill C-205 makes reference to an enclosed place or building where animals are kept. there's been some talk about, what if protesters entered a farm but not into the building? Are there some problems there in trying to sort of do your investigation as to, whether the protesters came anywhere close to animals in order to possibly transfer a disease?
Mr. Chair, to the member's question, yeah, that's an interesting one that, of course, timeliness would be so important to actually reach that conclusion of protesters being outside the barn or inside the barn, and was there an actual result of biosecurity issues that resulted in a potential disease spread?
Thank you, Mr. Mathert. Thank you, Mr. McGregor. And now we'll go to, for the 5-minute round, Mr. Epp for 5 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for the testimony from the officials. I'm going to start with just in our background, we had some material that showed 43 charges laid under the Health of Animals Act in 2018, 2 and 3 in 2019, and 12 in 2020. The precipitous decline. Can you comment what the nature of those charges in general were and why the decline?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll take I'll try to answer this question. Yeah, those charges would be, as Calvin Mathuik talked about, in humane transportation, for example, or where the animal treatment is not being done properly at the slaughter plant. And we do have provisions in the Act for issuing monetary penalties, and those, most of them will be under, like the 43 will be under those circumstances where, because the humane transportation under the Health of Animals Welfare is a federal responsibility. The on-farm responsibility comes under provincial responsibility, and the federal abattoir is again federal responsibility. So that's where our inspectors can issue penalties. Thank you.
Thank you. It does seem then, just by how you answer that, the number of charges has seemed to act as a deterrent for future, as a deterrent to bad behavior. So I guess that is, as I understand, is the intent of this bill as well. Can you talk about the farm biosecurity standards? My understanding is they, on their own, don't carry the force of law, but the passage of this bill, 205, would that not provide the force of law to basically to trespassing with the potential of breaching what's the word I'm looking for? Biosecurity standards. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And to the question from the member, yes, biosecurity is a strong tool to prevent diseases. As I explained in my other question, answer to the other question, that we are there to support the development and implementation of biosecurity measures. And it is a provincial and producer responsibility to implement them and enforce them. So we will only go and look at biosecurity issues if there's a regulated disease, because that is under the purview of federal government. As agriculture is a shared responsibility, many of the diseases are managed by the provincial government. We manage the diseases that are regulated or that are not present in Canada. In other words, we prevent the national borders or the diseases from entering the national borders. That's where our responsibility for trade comes in. So the biosecurity is a good tool, but it's the implementation and enforcement which is under provincial and producers' responsibility.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I'm going to turn over my remaining time to my colleague, Mr. Lehoux.
The interpreter cannot hear Mr. Lehoux.
Vous pouvez descendre votre bras, le bras du...
Mr. Lehoux, could you bring your boom mic down? Oh, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll continue in the same vein as my colleague with the question of enforcement. We understand that the CFIA is there for the whole issue of food safety, but couldn't there be closer collaboration between provincial authorities and peace officers in each of the provinces, and for Quebec and Ontario, but also through the RCMP elsewhere? But it just seems to me there should be better cooperation between the authorities if we really want the legislation we pass to really operate as fully as possible. So should there not be better cooperation between the authorities, both provincial and peace officers?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And to the member's question, yes, collaboration, cooperation is a key, and that's the principle that we work on every day when we are dealing with any agricultural issues. So we do look at what are our responsibilities, how do we divide them, and there are certain, as I said, certain diseases that provinces are managing, and there are other diseases that the federal government is managing. So by enacting this into the Health of Animals Act, I think this is going to confuse the responsibilities that are already clear, and then it'll have a bit of a difficulty for people to think where to go. Should they go to under provincial legislation to enforce this, or should they go to the national legislation or to the peace
Alors,
officers?
à ce moment-là, monsieur.
So, Mr. Kamal, it would perhaps be relevant that you give us your opinion on the role that the CFIA should play on the regulations that are already in effect in the provinces and how we can bring all of these forces together. Well, I'm sorry, there's not time for an answer. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
For 6 minutes. Go ahead, Mr. 5 minutes, sorry.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, with the delay, I wasn't sure if you called on me, so I'm going to start and you'll stop me if it's not. So thank you. Thanks for the time. And thank you to all our panelists and witnesses for being here. And thank you for your work. You know that we're talking today about the CFIA being responsible for the enforcement of the Health of Animals Acts and regulations. And I know we all agree that strong biosecurity measures are essential to protect our farmers, to protect our food supply, and our animal health and well-being. So as we've mentioned in the past year today, that protecting animal welfare is a shared responsibility between governments. And I believe you mentioned that provinces have jurisdiction on the farm. So existing legislation, whether it's under the criminal code that we discussed or provincial law, civil law, that already exist with trespassing and unlawful entry. So laws are usually meant to change things. So I'm not sure how it's clear what gap that we're trying to fix, because a number of provinces, including mine in Ontario, have these laws. So would federal law, in your opinion, then supersede the existing provincial laws and also supersede the existing local and regional laws that exist?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To the member's question, the federal laws are there when there's an issue of either interprovincial or national or international jurisdiction that we need to look at in the context of trade. When it comes to things within the province, especially in agriculture on the farm, it'll be the provincial jurisdiction, as you mentioned, and as I mentioned before. By enacting these provisions in the Health of Animals Act, it will not supersede the provincial law. And I'm not a lawyer, and I stand corrected, but the way it is written, the strength will be not there, because we'll have to prove beyond doubt that somebody has committed an activity that caused the disease and breached biosecurity. So in that context, I think it's better that the trespassing laws are there from the provincial perspective, that are there to protect those kind of activities. Thank you.
I thank you for clearing that up. Then maybe you can expand on, you or one of the other panelists, on how a CFI official would be able to prove intent to threaten biosecurity in the case of an already unlawful activity, given that they would be called in well after, we've established that, and possibly even accompanied by a local peace officer. So how would you be able to, to be able to prove this intent to threaten biosecurity?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll ask if Mary Jane wants to take this question.
Sure, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think this is one area, the member's question, which is gives us the concept that it will create some serious enforcement challenges for the CFI the offense will be very difficult to prosecute, we think. The wording of the proposed amendment in the way it's worded will require the Crown to have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the trespasser understood the risk of disease transmission resulting from entering the premise and deliberately acted in disregard for the knowledge or was reckless to the risk. It is going to make it exceptionally hard to hold anyone accountable as merely raising a reasonable doubt that the person knew or even suspected the risk would result likely in an acquittal. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Well, thank you. And maybe I can continue my questioning with Ms. Ireland, because you mentioned the word reckless. So how would you interpret that term reckless? And could someone else interpret it differently, the word that term reckless that would be in this bill?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's a great question. So I'm going to stay in my lane here as not being a lawyer, and I think it deserves some thought and deliberation on the wording and how it would be enforced and interpreted. But I could see as a CFI official, and I can also ask my colleague, Mr. Mathiak, to add, it would be difficult to actually define and prove intent in this particular bill. Mr. Mathiak, do you want to add anything to that?
Mr. Chair, to my colleague, to member, it is going to be a high burden for us to prove that at the moment that there, as the term was used, reckless, to willfully, knowingly entered the premise with an outcome of impacting biosecurity and spreading a disease. That whole onus of proof would need a very high legal test from our Department of Justice to prove what would we need to actually demonstrate to prove that degree of tests. And again, in respect to the lawyers to helping us, the Department of Justice would be needed to really refine that particular proof of test.
Okay, thank you. I believe that's my time, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. And now we'll go to Monsieur Perron.
Mr. Perron, for 2.5 minutes. Yes, thank you very much. Mr. Mathiak and Ms. Ireland, I don't know which of you will answer. You spoke about the need for significant resources for rapid intervention, and we also talked about partnerships with local peace officers. Could we not just simply count on police officers and animals to be there if someone has intruded on these animals? And the second question is that it would be really difficult to prove intent, you said, but the person who appeared before, who is the sponsor of the bill, said that there was no proof needed. Just the simple fact that these people had trespassed would make that mean that they would be subject to these fines. So, if it's going to be difficult to prove, what should we change? Because the committee also has the ability to table amendments to this bill. What would you suggest, therefore, that we change so that we don't have this burden of proof that you've spoken of?
Mary Jane, do you want to, Mr. Chair, Mary Jane, do you want to start off and I will
I think, thanks, Mr. Chair, and I'll pass it over to you, Calvin, in a second. I think what we're trying to describe to the committee today is the challenges with the bill as it is written for the CFIA, what we do now, what our authorities are, where our inspectors are and are not, and what some of the enforcement challenges will be for the Canadian Food Inspection Agency with this bill. And so I think that's my role and our role here today, to describe those to you and make sure the committee understands those elements. Kelvin?
Yeah, thank Mr. Chair, and to the member's question and to my colleague. We have a very strong collaborative partnership with our provincial and territorial governments where it leads to mandates on animal health, provincial or federal. And that collaboration partnership is quite active, where we are engaging on all matters that simply will that have a question about jurisdictional authority and involvement. And so there is a very strong relationship in that regard. To Mary Jane's comment is that this would be a profound transformative change to our mandate as the agency that if passed, we would have to reflect on what clearly would we have to put in place to actually administer this statute. And again, to Dr. Comeau's comment about authorities of jurisdiction would have to be really articulated.
Thank you, Mr. Perron. And now to Mr. McGregor for 2.5 minutes. Go ahead, Mr. McGregor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think, the question I have is probably going to be a recap of some of the answers that you've given to some of my colleagues. You've mentioned that there are some provinces which now have these trespass laws in place, which are designed specifically for farms. In a hypothetical situation, if we did have a trespasser who did come onto a farm in one of these provinces, did somehow spread a disease that wiped out a large percentage of the existing livestock, under current law, without C205, what are the applicable federal laws, provincial laws in place right now to help that farmer have accountability against the trespasser? And also, what kind of recourse does the farmer have in terms of getting financial help to assist with the damages to his or her farm?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll take this question. Very good question. So in the current Health of Animals Act, we have these provisions. If there is a disease outbreak on a farm that and CFI inspectors find out that there is a disease happening and it's a regulated disease under the Health of Animals Act, they will go and do the investigation. And that investigation under the emergency management will be looking at how much the disease has spread, what was the cause, where did the disease come from. As we did recently with tuberculosis outbreak and avian influenza, so we'll investigate, we'll take samples, we'll take tests, and we'll go to farms where the animals have come from or the animals have been bought into. So, tracing backward and tracing forward in order to find the cause. And we do everything to look at the cause. And if we know what the cause is, we'll zero in on and eliminate that cause. And if there was a illegal activity, we may also have the assistance from the peace officers to help us. In order to do this investigation, we do have provisions under the Health of Animals Act and regulations to provide compensation to the producers for the destruction of these animals, because we'll have to destroy these animals to stop the spread of the disease. Our Department of Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, they also have provisions to help the producers if we have put animals under quarantine, or they have to put down healthy animals for some reason. They can also come in and implement some of the provisions of their funding to the producers. So there are provisions in the Health of Animals Act already that enable us to investigate and find the cause and eliminate the cause of diseases. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McGregor, and thank you, Mr. So that will conclude our second panel and our committee meeting. And I want to thank from the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, Dr. Jaspiner Komal, and also Mr. Kelvin Matwick, and also Madame Mary Jane Ireland. So thank you all for being here and answering our questions. And again, that will conclude our meeting. I want to wish everyone a good weekend if we don't see each other before. And enjoy yourself on the weekend, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you.